I still remember the sound. It wasn't like in the movies, you know. It was muffled, a wet sound, followed by a silence that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. Marcos fell to his knees first, looking at me with those eyes that always judged me. But for the first time, there was something different in them. Surprise. As if, after all, he had never expected me to be capable of it. The knife in my hand dripped, marking the floor with small drops that seemed to count the seconds. 1, 2, 3, until he collapsed completely. My own brother, my torturer, my blood. And at that moment, I felt nothing but terrible relief. My name is Diego. I'm 19 now. The square where I'm sitting is a few blocks from where it all happened. But it feels like another world. People pass by, living their normal lives, not knowing who I am or what I did. Some may have read about it in the newspapers or seen it on the local news. Teenager stabs older brother to death. The sensationalist details that followed, the speculation, the lies, none of that matters. I spent 2.5 years in a juvenile detention center for what I did to Marcos. They decided it was manslaughter with extenuating circumstances. It could have been 7 years, but my lawyer managed to prove part of the hell I went through. Only part of it, because some things are impossible to explain, impossible to make anyone fully understand. I've been free for 6 months. I'm trying to rebuild something that resembles a normal life. But how do you build normality after killing your own brother? How do you explain to people that despite what you did, you're not a monster? Or maybe I am. Maybe I became exactly what I feared most. What would you do if the person who was supposed to protect you became your worst enemy? What if the only person who understood your pain decided to join your executioner? I'm ready to tell everything now, not to justify myself, but so that maybe someone will understand how a normal kid can reach a point of no return. People are quick to judge when they hear the word murderer, but I ask that you hear my story out before deciding who I am. I'm not proud of what I did, but I can't say I completely regret it either. It's complicated. Real life is complicated, full of gray areas, where everyone wants to see only black and white. If you're really paying attention to my story, do me a favor. Like this video right now. Subscribe to the Traumatic Testimonials channel. Turn on the bell to receive notifications and tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. It seems silly, I know. But when you've spent years being ignored, every sign that someone is listening means a lot. And believe me, what I'm about to tell you will change the way you see many things. There are things about my family that no one knows, things that didn't even come up in the trial. This is the story of how my father destroyed our family, how my brother became my enemy, and how I ended up with a knife in my hand that night in October 3 years ago. Our family seemed normal on the outside. We lived in a middle-class neighborhood in Laumanpanla, in our own house, with a car in the garage and roast pork on Sundays. My father, Roberto, worked as a manager in a building supply store. My mother, Lucia, was an elementary school teacher, the kind everyone loves. Marcos was 4 years older than me. We were the Gutierrez brothers, the well-behaved kids from Jacaranda Street. The facade began to crack when the front door closed. My father always had an explosive temper, but at first he managed to control it in front of visitors. "Wait until your father gets home." It was a phrase that had frozen my blood since I was 5 years old. Not because he always hit me, but because of the unpredictability. We never knew what would trigger his rage. The early years were peaceful. I have some good memories. Days of fishing, soccer games, snowball fights in the park. My brother, Marcos, protected me. Being older, he taught me tricks for dealing with our father. Don't talk when he's drinking. Get out of the way when he starts yelling at Mom. If he asks you something, say yes and get out fast. The change began when I was 8 and Marcos was 12. My father lost his job and was unemployed for 6 months. Money was tight, tequila consumption increased, and what had been a difficult temperament turned into something monstrous. The first time he really hit Marcos, it wasn't a slap or a pinch. It was a violent beating with a belt. All because Marcos spilled a glass of soda on the new carpet. I remember hiding in my room, covering my ears, hearing my brother's screams as he apologized, and my mother begging my father to stop. And that's not to mention what he did to my brother at night when he drank too much, just the two of them in a dark room. After that, it was as if a dam had broken. My father found a perfect target in Marcos. It was as if all the frustration, all the hatred he felt for life, he could take out on him. Marcos was tall for his age. He talked back when he shouldn't have, and that seemed to provoke my father even more. With me, it was different. It's not that he forgave me completely, but the beatings were less frequent, less violent. At the time, I didn't understand why. Now I know it was because I was more like my mother, quieter, less threatening to his authority. My mother tried to intervene at first. She even called the police twice, but my father was respected in the community. She knew the local police officers. Nothing happened beyond warnings. After each failed attempt to seek help, the violence worsened. She ended up giving up, becoming a shadow that circulated around the house, trying to mitigate the damage. When I was 10 and Marcos was 14, my mother began spending more time away, giving extra classes and participating in school projects. It was her way of escaping. We understood, but we felt abandoned. That's when Marcos started to change. At first, he still protected me. He would hide with me in the back room when we heard Dad's car pulling up. He taught me to identify the signs, the way he closed the door. Cue. How long it took him to take off his shoes. Whether he turned on the TV immediately or not. Small details that could mean the difference between a quiet night and terror. One day, I came home from school and found Marcos sitting on the sidewalk with a swollen face and a split lip. He had been caught smoking with some friends in the neighborhood. Our father found out from a neighbor and waited for him. The beating was so violent that even today I cannot describe it. I heard sounds that no child should ever hear. That night, something broke inside Marcos. Not just bones, but something deeper. He stopped crying during the beatings. He stopped apologizing. His gaze became empty, as if he had disconnected from his own body. "He can't hurt me if I don't feel anything," he once told me with a strange smile that didn't reach his eyes. Marcos began to spend more time away from home, coming back late, getting involved with older people with problems. I think it was his way of regaining some control, a feeling that he had a choice in some aspect of his life. Every new problem with Marcos fueled my father's anger, creating a vicious cycle that seemed to have no end. At 13, I tried to talk to my teacher about what was happening at home. She called the social worker, who paid us a visit. My father, always charismatic in public, convinced everyone that he was just a strict father trying to keep two teenagers on the straight and narrow. Marcos, surprisingly, confirmed his version. I was treated like a liar seeking attention. After that, things got worse for me, too. My father now saw me as a threat, someone who could expose him. The beatings became more frequent, but always calculated, never on the face or in visible places. The most disturbing change came when I turned 14. Marcos, then 18, began to act strangely. He no longer protected me. He began to repeat our father's phrases. "You have to be a man. Stop crying like a little girl. They hit you because you deserve it." It was as if, in order to survive, he had begun to identify with the aggressor. Psychologists call it Stockholm Syndrome, I think. At the time, I only knew that I was losing the only person who understood me, my only ally in that house of horrors. The year I turned 15 was when everything completely fell apart. Marcos had practically become a copy of our father, not in terms of physical violence, not yet, but in his mentality. He spent hours with our father in the garage fixing the car, drinking beer, laughing at jokes that used to make him tremble with fear. The most disturbing thing was how he seemed to have developed the same contempt for me that our father had, as if I were weak, pathetic, unworthy of respect. It started with little things, hiding my books, eating my dinner, locking me in the bathroom. One night, I came home late from the library. I was studying for an important exam and lost track of time. I entered the house, trying not to make any noise, but my father was awake and waiting. Marcos was also there, sitting on the couch with a beer in his hand, watching. "Where were you, Olgun?" my father asked, already getting up. "In the library, studying for... I didn't finish the sentence. The first blow hit me in the stomach, knocking the wind out of me. I fell to my knees, and then the kicks came. Marcos just watched, drinking his beer. "Help," I managed to say between blows. Marcos smiled. A smile I will never forget. "You have to learn to be a man someday," he said, repeating the phrase our father used to say when he beat him years before. That night, as I cleaned my blood in the bathroom, I realized that something fundamental had changed. It was no longer just my father I was fighting now. It was my own brother. The person who should understand that he lived the same nightmare had joined the enemy. The following weeks were a growing nightmare. Marcos began spreading rumors about me at school and in the neighborhood. He told the neighbors that he had caught me stealing money from our father's wallet. He told the teachers that I was using drugs. He told the few friends I had that he had caught me wearing the underwear of a cousin who had visited us. I didn't understand why he was doing this. It was as if he needed to destroy me to feel better, as if my existence was a constant reminder of what he had suffered, of how much he had bent and changed himself in order to survive. I tried to confront him once when we were alone at home. "Why are you doing this to me? We suffered the same things, Marcos. I know what he did to you." He pushed me against the wall so hard that I hit my head. His eyes had the same empty look as always, but there was something new there. Pleasure. "You don't know anything," he said. "You were always the protected one, the favorite. I endured the worst for years to keep you safe. And how do you thank me? By being weak, whining, threatening to tell the others." "I just wanted help," I replied, feeling tears welling up in my eyes. "Help," he laughed. "No one is ever going to help us. The only way to survive is to become stronger than him, and you never will be." From that day on, Marcos began to actively participate in the abuse, not just watching, but suggesting punishments, inventing reasons for me to be punished. It was as if he had found an outlet for all his pent-up hatred, and that outlet was me. The situation worsened when my mother finally abandoned us. She just couldn't take it anymore and left one morning, leaving only a note saying she loved us. But she couldn't go on living like that. For me, it was devastating. For Marcos, it was the final confirmation that the world was a cruel place where only the strong survived. With my mother out of the picture, there was no one left to soften the situation. The beatings became more frequent and intense. My father seemed to channel all the rage of abandonment into me. Marcos gained more and more privileges for being his new ally. One day, I came home from school and found my room completely ransacked, my notebooks torn, clothes thrown on the floor, and worst of all, my diary, where I wrote down everything that happened, open on the bed. Marcos was sitting next to it, reading it with a smile on his face. "Interesting reading, gay boy," he said, waving the diary. "I bet Dad would love to see how you describe him here. Monster, abuser, demon, those are strong words." "Give that back to me," I asked, trembling with rage and fear. "Or what?" he laughed. "Who are you going to cry to? Mom's gone. Nobody cares about you." I lunged to get the diary back, but he was bigger and stronger. He pushed me aside easily and put the diary in his pocket. "This is my life insurance now," he said. "If you try anything against me or Dad, everyone will know what you really think, what you plan to do." I didn't understand at the time what he meant by what you plan to do, but I soon found out. Marcos had added pages to my diary, pages written in an imitation of my handwriting, detailing plans about how I intended to kill my father in his sleep, how I followed girls from school, how I stole things from stores. He had created a distorted and sick version of me, and now he threatened to make it public if I didn't do exactly what he wanted. The following months were a living hell. Marcos forced me to do his homework, constantly humiliated me, and occasionally left fake pages from my diary in places where people could find them, as if by accident. Little by little, I lost what remained of my friends. Teachers began to look at me with suspicion. Neighbors crossed the street when they saw me. Marcos had managed to isolate me completely, turning me into the monster he himself had become. The worst moment came when he accidentally dropped one of the fake pages near my father. It said how I was planning to slowly poison him by putting small amounts of cleaning products in his food. My father, already paranoid by nature, believed it immediately. The beating I received that night was different from all the previous ones. It wasn't just violence, it was an attempt to eliminate me. My father really wanted to kill me, I'm sure. He only stopped because Marcos intervened, not to protect me, but to prolong my suffering. "It's not worth going to jail for him, Dad," he said, grabbing my father's arm, which was holding a broken broomstick. "He's not worth it. Let's just make sure he never thinks of doing something like this again." The solution they came up with was to lock me in the basement for 3 days. No food, just enough water to keep me from dying of dehydration. 3 days in the dark, listening to the two of them talking and laughing upstairs, as if I didn't exist, as if I were just a troublesome pet, temporarily isolated. When they finally let me out, something inside me had changed. Fear was giving way to a cold, calculating hatred. Not the explosive kind of hatred my father had, but something deeper, quieter. I began to understand that there was no way out as long as I remained the perfect victim. I started avoiding the house as much as possible. I would wake up before them and leave. I only returned when I was sure they were asleep. At school, I started training in the gym after class, not to become strong like Marcos, but to better withstand the blows, to resist longer. Marcos noticed the change in me. He saw that I no longer cried, that I no longer begged. This seemed to bother him deeply, as if my silent resistance was a challenge to the new order he had established. That's when he decided that defaming my reputation wasn't enough. He started planting evidence in my backpack, small objects stolen from neighboring houses, disturbing photos taken from the internet. A knife, he swore, he had found under my mattress. It was clear what he wanted: to destroy me completely, to turn me into the monster he said I was. Perhaps, in some sick way, he needed to justify his own betrayal, his own transformation. If I really were the monster he portrayed me to be, then his alliance with our father would be justified. The situation came to a head one night when our father was not at home. Marcos confronted me in the kitchen, drunker than usual. He was holding my diary, the real one and the fake one, mixed up in such a way that it was impossible to tell what I had written and what he had fabricated. "You know, bro," he said, staggering slightly, "I've been thinking. It's time to show this to more people. Maybe the police. What do you think? There are things here that are crimes." "Did you write that?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, even though I could feel my heart racing. "And who's going to believe you?" He laughed. "The weirdo, the troublemaker that everyone knows is disturbed, or me. The model son who works, studies, helps his father." He was right, and we both knew it. He had carefully built his reputation while destroying mine. It was his word against mine, and his carried much more weight. "Why?" I asked, feeling something break inside me. "Why do all this? I'm your brother. I loved you. I admired you." That's when I saw something I had never seen before on his face. A hesitation, a flash of genuine pain. For a fleeting moment, the old Marcos, the one who protected me, seemed to return. "You would never understand." His voice suddenly sounded tired. "What he did to me, what really happened when you weren't looking." He stopped, as if he had said too much. "Then tell me," I insisted, seeing an opening, an opportunity to reconnect. "We can face it together like before." Marcos looked at me for a long moment, and for a second I thought I had reached something in him. Then, like a mask slipping back into place, his face hardened. "It's too late for that," he said coldly. "You chose your side when you tried to expose us, when you almost ruined everything." He turned to leave, taking my diary with him, taking away my last chance to clear my name. "Tomorrow, I'll show this to the police," he said over his shoulder. "Maybe you'll finally learn your lesson when you're in a reformatory or maybe a psychiatric hospital." That's when something inside me just snapped. It all happened too fast. Marcos had his back to me, heading for the kitchen door with my diary in his hand. The document that held both my salvation and my condemnation. 1 second, I was standing there, frozen. The next, I had grabbed the kitchen knife from the sink. It wasn't a planned move. I hadn't thought about the consequences or what would happen next. It was pure instinct, pure survival, like a cornered animal that finally decides to attack the predator. "Marcos," I called out. My voice was surprisingly firm. When he turned around, his eyes widened at the sight of the knife in my hand. Not out of fear. Marcos rarely showed fear, but out of surprise, as if he had never really considered me capable of reacting. "What are you going to do with that?" he asked with a mocking smile beginning to form at the corner of his mouth. "Threaten me. You don't have the guts." I took a step forward. He didn't back down. That was Marcos, always confident, always sure he was in control. "Give me back my diary," I asked one last time. He laughed. That laugh that had become the soundtrack to my nightmares. "Or what? Are you going to stab your own brother?" He waved the diary in front of me, taunting me. "That will only prove that everything I wrote about you is true." That's when he made his final mistake. He opened the diary and began to read aloud. Sometimes I think about how easy it would be to end it all. Wait until he falls asleep and just finish it. No one would miss me. Maybe it would be a favor to the world. I recognized the words. They weren't mine. They were his, written to incriminate me. Hearing those words in his voice, seeing the pleasure he took in destroying me, it was as if something broke inside me. I lunged forward. He reacted too late, surprised by my sudden boldness. The knife went in with an ease I never imagined. It wasn't like in the movies, with blood splattering everywhere. It was silent, almost anticlimactic. Marcos looked down at the knife in his abdomen, then at me with an expression of disbelief, as if, after years of terrorizing me, he had never really considered that I might fight back. He started to speak, but his voice failed him. I felt nothing in that moment, no satisfaction, no horror, no regret. It was as if I were watching it all happen to someone else. Marcos took a step back, stumbled, fell to his knees. The diary slipped from his hands. He tried to press the wound, but the blood kept coming, running between his fingers. His eyes never left mine, not with hatred, but with something like recognition. "You're just like him." Those were his last words before he collapsed completely. I stood there, motionless, staring at my brother's body. the knife still in my hand. It was as if time had stopped. The seconds dragged on like hours. Somewhere in my mind, a voice told me I should run, call an ambulance, do something, but my body wouldn't respond. I don't know how long I stood there before I heard the front door open. My father was back earlier than expected, his heavy footsteps echoing down the hall. Then the scream, a scream I had never heard before, not of anger, but of genuine pain. "What did you do?" He ran to Marcos, knelt beside the body, tried to feel his pulse, his breath. It was too late. I think we both knew it. When he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes I had never seen before. Fear, not of me, but of what had happened, of what would come next. For one bizarre second, we were just father and son facing a tragedy. He picked up the phone and called 911. His voice trembled as he gave the address and described what he had found. He didn't mention the knife in my hand or the blood on my clothes. He just said that his son was hurt and needed urgent help. After hanging up, he turned to me. "What happened here?" he asked, his voice strangely calm. "He was going to destroy me," I replied. The words came out mechanical, distant. He wrote things in my diary, things I never said. He was going to show them to the police. They would believe him. My father looked at the diary lying on the floor, then at Marcos, then at me. I saw something flash through his eyes. Understanding, guilt. I couldn't tell. "Drop the knife," he said. Finally, I obeyed, letting it fall with a metallic clang onto the kitchen floor. "Go clean yourself up," he ordered. I went to the bathroom in a trance, washed my hands, changed my bloody t-shirt, returned to the kitchen, and found my father sitting on the floor, holding Marcus's body, rocking back and forth as if he were a sleeping child. "Why?" he asked, without looking at me. "Why you too?" I didn't answer. There was no simple answer. We were all guilty, each in our own way. He, for starting it all. Marcos, for becoming part of the problem. Me, for ending it in the worst possible way. Sirens began to wail in the distance. My father gently laid Marcos' body on the floor and stood up. For the first time in my life, he looked old and defeated. "What do you want to do?" he asked, surprising me. "I don't understand." "We can say it was self-defense, that he attacked you, that you defended yourself." I blinked in confusion. "But that's not what happened." "It doesn't matter what happened," he said, running his hand over his face. "What matters is what we're going to say happened." I realized then what he was doing. He wasn't protecting me. He was protecting himself. If the truth about our family came out, if people knew what went on inside those walls, he would be condemned too. I didn't answer, finding sudden clarity. I'm going to tell the truth. All of it. The old instinct to intimidate me came back, but he stopped himself. Marcus's eyes, still open, seemed to be watching us. When the police and ambulance arrived, I told them everything about the years of abuse, about how Marcos had changed, about the lies, the cheating, about how I had finally broken down that night. I showed them the scars on my body, the cigarette burn marks on my back. I handed over the diary, showing the pages I had actually written and Marcus's forgeries. My father denied everything, of course. He said I was mentally unstable, that I had made it all up to justify my brother's murder. But there was too much evidence now. Neighbors who finally admitted to hearing the screams for years. Teachers who noticed the bruises, even some of Marco's friends who confirmed that he had bragged about teaching me to be a man. I was arrested, of course. I was 16, and I had killed my brother. The context didn't matter. The circumstances didn't matter. That's how the system works. The months that followed were a whirlwind of statements, hearings, psychological evaluations. My father was also investigated. He ended up being charged with child abuse and neglect. He lost everything, his job, his reputation, and eventually even his house, which he had to sell to pay for lawyers. At the trial, the prosecutor tried to paint me as a calculating psychopath who had planned to kill his brother out of jealousy. My lawyer, a public defender who took a real interest in the case, presented all the evidence of abuse, the medical reports of old injuries, the testimonies of neighbors and teachers. The jury was divided. On the one hand, I had confessed to the crime. I never deny stabbing Marcos. On the other hand, the circumstances were so extreme that it was difficult not to feel some sympathy. In the end, the judge opted to send me to a juvenile detention center with review after 2 years. The most surreal part of it all was when I ran into my father in the court hallway after the sentencing. He was handcuffed, waiting for his own hearing. "You destroyed this family," he said. His eyes were red with rage, or perhaps tears. "You started all this," I replied emotionlessly. "We were just kids. That was the last time I saw him. I heard he got 5 years in prison, but I don't know if he served his full sentence. I don't care to know." The 2 years in juvenile detention were strange. For the first time in my life, I had a routine, clear rules, predictable consequences. There was violence, of course. It's impossible to lock up dozens of troubled teenagers together without something happening. But it was different from the violence at home. It wasn't personal. It didn't come from someone who was supposed to love me. I had sessions with psychologists and participated in therapy groups. At first, I didn't talk much. What could I say? That I killed my brother and sometimes still dream about that moment, waking up without knowing if I feel remorse or relief. Little by little, I began to understand better what had happened to Marcos. One of the psychologists explained bond trauma. how victims of prolonged abuse sometimes identify with the abuser as a survival mechanism. As for Marcos, it was easier to join my father than to keep fighting him. Understanding does not mean forgiving, but it helped to process everything. Sometimes I wonder if I had suffered the same level of abuse that Marcos suffered, if I would have broken down in the same way, if I would have become the monster I was fighting against. I also understood better why my father focused more on Marcos than on me. Psychologists called him the scapegoat of the family. In abusive systems, one child is often singled out to receive most of the abuse, while others are partially spared. Marcos was chosen perhaps because he was the oldest, perhaps because he resembled our father more, perhaps simply by chance. This knowledge does not erase what I did, but it helps to carry the weight. It helps me to see myself not only as a murderer, but as someone who was shaped by circumstances beyond my control, and who, in a moment of extreme desperation, did something terrible. My mother reappeared during my second year of detention. She had found another man. She was living in another state, trying to rebuild her life. She apologized for abandoning us. She said she should have fought harder, that she should have taken us out of that house. "Why didn't you ever report him?" I asked her during one of her visits. "Why did you let it get to that point?" She cried. "Of course." She said she was afraid that my father had threatened to take us away from her if she tried anything, that she had nowhere to go. The usual excuses. Maybe it's true. Maybe she really didn't have any options, or maybe she just wasn't strong enough to protect us. The truth is that I understand her better now than I did before. I know how it feels to be powerless, trapped in a situation that seems to have no way out. The difference is that when I finally reacted, it wasn't by running away like she did. It was with violence. When I turned 18, my case was re-evaluated. My behavior in the detention center had been exemplary. The psychological reports were favorable. The judge decided to release me on probation and required me to continue therapy. I walked out into a world I no longer recognized. My childhood home had been sold. My father was in prison. My mother was living with her new partner in another state. Marcos was dead by my own hands. It was as if that whole life had happened to someone else, as if I had woken up from a nightmare, only to discover that the nightmare was real and its consequences would follow me forever. During my time in the detention center, the hardest part was not the physical restrictions or the loss of freedom. It was facing what I had done. Every night before I went to sleep, Marco's face would appear, not with anger or fear, but with that last expression of recognition, as if he had finally seen something in me that had always been there. The other young people in the center had different stories. Some were there for theft, others for drugs, some for street fights. When they found out that I had killed my own brother, the reaction was always the same, a mixture of fascination and fear, as if I were a different but dangerous species. I didn't tell the whole story to just anyone, only to Miguel, my roommate during my last year there. A guy who was in prison for setting his stepfather's house on fire after years of abuse. He understood. He didn't judge me. Sometimes the most broken people are the ones who understand us best. Do you think what you did was wrong? He asked me one night when everyone else was asleep. I know it was, I replied automatically. That's not what I asked, he insisted. I asked if you think it was wrong. I thought for a long time before answering. I don't know. I know that killing is wrong. I know I took my brother's life, but at that moment there seemed to be no other option. That's why we're here, he said, staring at the ceiling. Not because we're bad, but because the world cornered us until the only way out seemed to be through violence. That conversation stayed with me. During therapy sessions, I tried to find other paths I could have taken. I could have run away like my mother. I could have sought help elsewhere. I could have waited until I turned 18 and then escaped legally. But the truth is, when you live in constant terror for years, your horizons shrink. You don't think about long-term options or elaborate plans. You think only about surviving the day, the hour, the minute. The center had a small but reasonable library. I read a lot during those 2 years: psychology, philosophy, history, trying to understand not only what had happened to me, but the larger pattern. How violence is passed down from generation to generation like an inheritance. How can people who were victims become perpetrators? My father was probably also abused as a child. I never confirmed this. He never talked about his childhood, but the signs were there. The cycle of abuse is real and terrifying in its persistence. How many generations back did this chain extend? And, more importantly, would it end with me? When I left the center 6 months ago, that was my biggest concern. I wasn't afraid of the practical difficulties, where to live, how to find work with my background. I feared myself, what was inside me, what might awaken again. My mother offered to take me in at her new home, but I refused. It would be too easy to fall into resentment, into bitterness. Besides, she had a new life, a man who seemed decent, and a young son, my half-brother, whom I barely know. Instead, I accepted help from a reintegration program. They found me a room in a shared house for young people in similar situations, a part-time job in a bookstore, and I continued with weekly therapy as required by my probation. The shared house is just a few blocks from this square where I am sitting now. I come here almost every day, usually in the late afternoon when there are few people around. I sit on this same bench. I look at the trees, the sky, the people passing by. And I try to remember that there is a world beyond my story, beyond my pain. The question I am asked most often by therapists, social workers, and even some colleagues who know my story is whether I regret it. It's a complicated question. Do I regret taking a life? Yes, deeply. I regret losing my brother. That boy who once protected me, who taught me to ride a bike, who laughed at my silly jokes. But I regret the act itself on that specific night in that kitchen. With that Marcos who had become an extension of the terror that was my father. I can't say, and that uncertainty haunts me more than anything else. Psychologists say this is normal, that it's part of the process of acceptance and healing, that I can condemn the act without condemning myself completely as a person, that a decision made in a moment of extreme desperation does not define who I am or who I can become. I try to believe that, on good days, I even manage to do so. On bad days, I still wake up to the muffled sound of the knife entering my brother's body. I still see his eyes looking at me. I still hear his last words. "You're just like him." Maybe he was right. Maybe there's something of my father in me, something violent and irreparable. Or maybe it was just the last blow he could give me, planting this doubt that would eat away at me forever. The truth, I believe, lies somewhere between these extremes. I am not a monster, nor am I innocent. I am a product of my choices, yes, but also of the choices others made for me, of the environment that shaped me, of the traumas I carried. I am trying to rebuild something that resembles a normal life. I work, I study to finish high school. I talk to my housemates. I even go out occasionally, small steps back to humanity. I don't know what the future holds for me. I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive myself completely. I don't know if I deserve to be forgiven, but I do know that despite everything, I'm here, breathing, trying, surviving. Not out of revenge or hatred like before, but for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, I can find some purpose beyond the pain that brought me here. If you've made it this far and understand what I've been through, I need to ask you one last favor. Like this video right now. Subscribe to the Traumatic Testimonials channel. Turn on the bell so you don't miss the next stories, and tell me in the comments where you're watching this from. It seems silly, I know. But when you've spent years being ignored, every sign that someone is listening means a lot. And believe me, every comment, every person who listens to my story until the end helps me feel that I'm not completely alone in this process. That maybe my experience can help other people avoid the same path. I'm not here to be judged or acquitted, just to tell the truth as I lived it. What you do with that truth, well, that's no longer in my hands. I remember something I read during my time at the center. A quote from Viktor Frankl. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response is our growth and our freedom. My space was too small that night in the kitchen, almost non-existent, but today it grows a little every day. And in that space, perhaps there is the possibility of becoming someone different from what fate seemed to have mapped out for me. This is my story, a story of pain, of betrayal, of violence. But I also hope it is a story of survival and perhaps one day of redemption. Yeah.